I'm Daniel Levine, and this is the Bio Report. The pharmaceutical industry has long argued that high drug prices are necessary to incentivize investment in and fund high-risk research and development of innovative new therapies. In a working paper published by the Institute for New Economic Thinking, William Lazonick, professor of economics at the University of Massachusetts Lowell, and his colleagues challenged the industry's premise. They argue that top pharmaceutical companies spend more of their profits on buying back their shares to boost their stock prices than they do on R&D, a move that enriches senior executives. We spoke to Lazonick about the paper, why he believes the so-called financialized business model is counterproductive to innovation, and what steps he thinks are necessary to change the landscape. Bill, thanks for joining us.
Thanks. Good to talk to you.
We're going to talk about a new working paper you co-authored that argues large biopharmaceutical companies focus on maximizing shareholder value is hurting innovation, and that perverse incentives to executives over how they're compensated is driving that. Drug development is long and costly and fraught with risk, but the industry has long argued that high drug prices are necessary to allow for investment in the development of new innovative therapeutics. You argue, though, that high drug prices undermine medical innovation. Can you explain?
Yeah, so there's no doubt that if you're going to run pharmaceutical development and as a business, there is a question of whether it should be run as a regular business, but let's assume that you are going to run this business, that you're going to need to have some profit. And the function of profit is to reinvest them in the process of developing those drugs and distributing those drugs and getting the product out there to the people who need it. Now, the drug industry has, in the United States, has long argued that, as you mentioned, that they need to have unregulated drug prices in order to have the profits and to make all this uncertain investment over a very long period of time to generate innovative new drugs that deliver them to people who need them. And this, despite the fact that virtually every other country in the world regulates drug prices, recognizing that the drugs that people are using, the medicines that people are using are necessities. They're not things they want to buy, they have to buy them. And that they need to be able to afford them, or at least they need to have insurance coverage that can afford to pay for them. And I think it goes along with the same logic that in every other country you have some kind of, in that country at least, you have some kind of single payer health insurance that is dealing with the cost of health care and looks at drugs prices and says that we have to regulate them. In the United States, we have neither. And so I think the two can go hand in hand. One is saying, okay, health care is not necessarily a right, it's not necessarily a necessity, it's something that people can afford because they can afford it. Of course, we've been trying to deal with that issue in various ways in the United States. And drug prices are something that businesses produce, and they need to make a profit. And they need to make a profit not just because there are some people invested in the company, but because they have to reinvest the profits in the company, in this case, in drug development. And I think those are valid. Again, if drug development is a business.
You examined 18 drug companies in the S&P 500 index in January 2016 and looked at a 10-year period. What did you find?
Okay, so here's the problem. that this argument has been going on with Congress since the 80s at least, whenever there's been an attempt to say, oh, drug prices are too high, we should keep them low or regulate them, particularly since we give the drug companies patents, etc. What has not been noticed, and this is something that began in the mid-1980s, is how the companies are using their profits. They're not using them, in general, to invest in new drug development. They're using high profits to prop up their stock prices. And they're doing that both through paying large dividends to shareholders and doing stock buybacks, which is something that I've written a lot about. It's pervasive across every industry in the United States, particularly among large companies like the pharmaceutical companies. But that's how they've been using their profits. And so when I look at these discussions that are going on or attempts at regulation, I'm waiting for the next question to be asked by whoever is asking the question for decades, until he's now retired in Congress. It was Henry Waxman from California who was asked the question. Well, why are you spending almost all your profits, even more of your profits sometimes, on distribution to shareholders if you're saying that you need high drug prices to reinvest in drug development to accelerate investment in drug development? Unfortunately, that question has never been asked. And so our paper asks that question. The paper points out that you should be asking that question. And unless the pharmaceutical industry has an answer to that question, to say either stop them from doing these distributions to shareholders, I argue in general that we should ban stock buybacks for this type, and or regulate their prices. We should do both of those things.
Well, put that into perspective, though. To what extent are companies taking their profits and investing in R&D versus share buybacks or paying dividends to stockholders?
Well, there's plenty of investment in R&D, and it's not that they don't invest in R&D. There is, however, a lot of evidence that the R&D is not very productive. And I think part of the reason it isn't productive is because the people who are running those companies are not dedicated to making it productive. So it's not hard for a company to show that they've had high R&D expenses. In fact, I would say if a company like Merck or Pfizer, who are among the worst in terms of this, what I call the financialization of these companies, spending over the last few decades 100% of the profits buying back the stock and paying dividends, if they didn't show R&D, traders in the stock market would say, oh, well, they're not really a drug company. They're not going to have anything down the line to show for this. So what they do both spend a lot on R&D, and they do all these distributions to shareholders. But my argument is that where they do that, the distribution to shareholders, it actually undermines that R&D investment. It's not investing in the type of R&D that's generating new drugs. It's not committing the money that the company has, not to something called R&D, but to teams of scientists who are going to develop the drug. In fact, often what they're doing is charging high drug prices just to get the stock price up. Whereas they, in fact, in many drugs, charge lower drug prices. They could get a larger market. The cost of actually scaling up in producing the drugs is often not very high, if any, it's often minimal, and could be making perfectly good profits over time. But they're not doing that. So in fact, what they're often trying to do is get the prices up as much as possible, help boost the stock prices more with buybacks and dividends. And that's what the way, not only are these top executives acting, that's the way they're paid to act. And that's the way they're expected to act by people who hold shares. And unfortunately, the people who hold shares of companies are seen the people for whom these companies should be run. And that's a whole other discussion, because it shouldn't be run. Not necessarily drug companies, but no company in which that's publicly listed on the stock market should be run for their shareholders. Shareholders are just people who buy and sell shares.
Not to be overly simplistic, but what is the effect of a share buyback, and what is the impact of share buybacks on executive compensation?
Well, okay, so first of all, it means that we're paying high drug prices when the company's saying they need them, but that they're not using those high drug prices to spend them more research and development, they're using it to prop up their stock price. That's the first problem. The second problem is that the executives, which we show in this paper as well, that's what they're rewarded for. So, first of all, they're making tens of millions of dollars in compensation to top executives. 80 to 90% of that, and particularly the higher it goes, the more the case is stock-based pay. They're getting rewarded for getting the stock price up. Now, that also means that they're not likely to be executives. They're even very good at overseeing a process of drug development. They're good at overseeing a company that can figure out how to do financial engineering and get a stock price up. And often in those companies, when it comes to employing teams of scientists to develop the drugs, they're just as often willing to lay people off, to try to depress their pay, rather than to say, hey, that's what the company is all about, is having these people who can develop drugs. And the outcome of that are the customers, the people who need medicines, who want to deliver high-quality drugs at low prices. They're just not running companies that way. And actually, if they were running that companies that way, we could say that they're innovative, that they're developing a high-quality product at low cost to be passed on to the customer. That's what an innovative company does. And these drug companies are just the opposite of being innovative. They're financialized. They're run to basically make money for shareholders who don't really matter in any case. And the primary beneficiaries, at least on the first line of this, are the top executives who just separate themselves out in terms of their own pay from the success of the company as a whole. So often when the company isn't successful, they do well. The other part of this process, particularly with companies like Merck and Pfizer, is that a lot of the drugs that they sell are not drugs that they develop themselves. They might show R&D on their books, but they're drugs that they acquired from other companies that have been innovative and that have got money or patents on the drugs. And so then they buy these drugs, particularly when they've been seen as blockbuster drugs. They use their high stock prices often to use it as a currency to acquire the other company. And then they melt those patents dry. And over time, they become less capable of actually running innovative organizations. And so companies like Pfizer and Merck, one of the companies we looked at most of the older companies, they are basically, in my view, have lost the capacity to generate new drugs on their own. So they're always looking out there and saying, what is out there that we can buy that we can now try? In addition, there are some newer companies, and the most well-known among them is Gilead Sciences, which were started in the late 1980s, early 1990s, because it was clear that a new drug company could quickly get listed on the NASDAQ stock exchange. You can make money from that company even if no drug is produced. And they've been financialized right from the beginning. Whereas you look at Merck and Pfizer, they go back 100 years or so or more, and they're often innovative companies at one point. Gilead Sciences is a company that is just there to make money out of getting hold of drugs that that people need. And when they can do this, they will get the product price up as high as possible, try to boost the stock price as high as possible, and the senior executives will cash in. And this has happened really in an extreme case over the last few years with the hepatitis C drug that we have only drugs that they've been able to gouge the public basically on the drugs that they had very little to do with development. They basically got the drug from another company and then commercialized it. And the top executive in this case, named Martin, who is retired last year but is still raking in money as chairman of the company, in 2014 and 2015 alone, because of all the profits they were bringing in from this blockbuster drug and all that at very high prices, his take-home pay was over $400 million. And that's what he got for basically acquiring a drug that people need and gouging the public. And they also did about $15 billion in buybacks, which made them one of the biggest repurchasers over those years among all companies. And that's it's not just the way they operate; that is why they operate, and that is what those executives know when they operate. That is, and they even try to justify what they're doing in those terms. That we have to create value for shareholders. If you look at who the shareholders were, they're just people who buy and sell shares. They're not people who are actually putting money to risk in the company. The people who are putting in risk of the company are us as taxpayers, because we fund the National Institute of Health at a rate of about 30 to 32 billion a year, which is twice in real terms what it was in the mid-90s. The companies get advantage of that, and then countless numbers of people who actually work on drug development and not there at the end when it's put on the market to grab all this money. So we need a whole different system of way we govern these kind of companies, because they just are being run as money machines for a few people at the top.
So without getting into a defense of Gilead's pricing, their drugs are a cure for hepatitis C, and the pricing, as I understand it, was relative to what was already on the market. Is there a different paradigm that needs to be set for pricing?
Sure. I mean, first of all, if you recognize all the countless numbers of people who contribute to drug development before it becomes a commercial product, you say, okay, we got to spread the rest along all those people. That is the people who actually develop the drug, which is not these people who are raking in all this money. I can guarantee you, they're usually people who have a lot of legal background, commercial background. Secondly, the taxpayer is doing this. And thirdly, the drugs are things that are products that people need, and there's nothing that says that a business has to make as much profit as it can. Like most economists say that, but I think that is nonsense. Particularly where you have a product that is a necessity. And we have a long history in the United States, even, of regulating utilities when you have one utility that's needed in one area. In the drug industry, we patent the drugs, we give them patents. Their patents don't fall from the sky. We give the patents to these companies. And then we should regulate the drugs and make sure that they get out to as many people as possible at the lowest possible price. The companies will still make a decent profit. And they should have to justify that profit. And to say that profit is because they have to attract capital and make money for shareholders, this is nonsense once you look at where the financing comes from. The financing comes from, in fact, people helping the company develop drugs, them making some profit, them putting in drug development. It comes from government subsidies, taxes. There's a whole, this goes way beyond the drug company, but the whole myth of the shareholder as an investor in the United States, which is just nonsense. You or I can buy shares on the market. We do not invest one iota in the company when we buy shares. We're just using our savings to try to get a return, and that return has to be constrained, or we're going to, we already are destroying the economy for not constraining. It's not just to do with drug development. So in drug development and the pharmaceutical industry, we have a particular problem of shareholder value.
You argue the U.S. pharma business model is broken, and you make a series of policy recommendations to move the pharmaceutical industry away from its focus on maximizing shareholder value and focus instead on producing innovative and affordable drugs. I thought we could quickly walk through them and have you explain what they would do. The first is a ban on pharmaceutical companies from making stock repurchases.
Yeah, so every company should be banned from doing the type of stock purchases they're doing, which are draining trillions of dollars over the last decade even out of companies. It's what I call the legalized looting of the business corporation that's going on through these things. Stock buybacks, they have no purpose whatsoever except to manipulate the company's stock prices. They are allowed to do it because under the radar back in November of 1982, after Ronald Reagan got elected, and the Securities and Exchange Commission, which was supposed to regulate the stock market, got captured by free market economists. They passed this rule called 10b-18, which says basically that companies can do massive amounts of stock repurchases on any one day, day after day after day, and they won't be charged with manipulating the market. But the fact is, they are manipulating the market, and it's been going on now for decades. I argue that it's one of the prime reasons for concentration of income at the top of income distribution, which everybody's noticed. It's one of the top reasons, not just in drug industry, but generally for the loss of middle-class jobs. And so it's the major problem to do with business in the economy, and business is our economy. So what we need to do is ban them. And it's not really easy. It wouldn't be difficult to do that because this rule 10b-18 was never even vetted by Congress. It's simply a rule that was passed that the whole business community went along with, and that most economists would have no critique of. And so it needs to be commended. Now, it doesn't mean that if you or I hold shares in a company that we don't get any yield on those shares, you can get dividends. The dividends are very different than buybacks, because if I'm holding the shares and the company pays me some dividends, I also want the company to reinvest so that later on, when I might start to sell the shares, the company will have some products that are generating profits that are likely to make that share worth something. When you do buybacks, the people who gain are the people who sell the shares, and actually the people who know when to sell the shares. And that's why hedge fund managers love buybacks. Top executives of the stock-based trade who know when the buybacks are being done, they love buybacks. The investment banks that are building the deals and doing the deals with them, they love buybacks. But most of us get nothing out of it. We lose. So they should be banned. That's the first thing. And it's not just pharmaceuticals, but it's particularly egregious.
You also call for restructuring executive compensation.
Yeah. So the notion that the performance of a company is reflected in stock price is nonsense. Stock prices are, in any case, even without things like stock buybacks or price gouging, stock prices are subject to tremendous speculation. The stock market is not by and large a gambling casino. Even when you have good companies, and even the best companies, which people still generally will call a blue chip stock, and the blue chip is the valuable chip in a gambling casino. That's where that comes in. Nobody knows what the stock price of any company is going to be in an hour, 2 hours, a week, 2 weeks. It's just a gamble. Okay, now there are good companies that can pay dividends over time. They can have higher stock price over time. That they're really innovative. That's what we want. But a lot of the stock market is populated by people who are speculators. In addition, we now have the stock prices being driven systemically by manipulation. So we cannot look at a stock price and say that reflects the performance of the company. So how do we look at a company and say how is the performance? We look at the product it's producing, whether it's producing high-quality products, whether it's getting them out to people at prices that are able, willing to pay, get a large market share, whether in the process of doing that, it's paying its workers good wages, it's giving them job security, it's giving them good benefits. And guess what? Companies can do that. Innovative companies, we know, historically, we can look at even the present time companies that are doing that now, they can do that. But most American companies are not doing that because of the ideology of shareholder value system. Sure. So that part and parcel of that ideology is rewarding executives almost entirely in terms of stock price performance in one way or another. We should be rewarding top executives in terms of the real performance of the company. Delivering the products, delivering the jobs, the learning that goes on in the companies, the job security, the higher wages people have. When we look at wages at a macroeconomic level, and we look at people's wages rise, we say, oh, great. The economy is more prosperous. People are getting higher wages. We look at the company level, we say, oh, that's a higher cost. But that's not the way to look at it. When we get higher wages in the economy, it's because innovative companies are generating the productivity through the way their workers are working and developing the products that are justifying those higher wages. And that's what we need. Shareholder value undermines all that. I've written lots of papers that show how that's the case and why that's the case. And so when we look at who's making the key decisions about how to allocate resources, we have to incentivize them in terms of a different set of methods that have to do with innovation, not just we have to do with financial gain. What I mean by training and executive pay, changing the way we report the debt.
You'd also like to see the makeup of boards change. How so?
Well, okay, so I'm a taxpayer. Certainly in the pharmaceutical industry, the taxpayer plays a big role in funding that industry. I've calculated that in current dollars, the NIH, since they started recording costs in 1938, it's basically $1 trillion that in 2016 dollars that's been provided to that industry. There would not be a pharmaceutical industry without the NIH, National Institutes of Health. I want that return. I want when the company is successful. Okay, how do I protect that? Well, in part through the general tax structure, but we know what's happened to that. Companies saying we need lower taxes in order to be competitive, and then what do? They charge the public and pump up their stock prices. So I want someone representing me on the board of those companies as a taxpayer. If I'm a worker for a company and I am something like drug development, which can take 10 years, 20 years, I'm working on some piece of the science, I'm going into work every day. Yeah, I'm getting paid my salary, my wages now. But none of us need just a salary now. We need some, return in the future. And when I go into work, if I'm just working for what I produce today, then there's not going to be any drugs tomorrow. So when I work, what we want people to do is work for what we're developing in the future. So my efforts, or their efforts, is being invested in that company. And the return comes from a career, from being kept at that company, from actually when the company is successful in getting some of those gains. So I want people representing me if I'm a worker on my board. And those workers and taxpayer representatives are protecting far more important interests than the shareholder representative representing people who buy and sell shares. And the actual equity investors, they long since disappeared from these companies. I'm not saying that people who put money into a company and make a real investment that can only get a return if the company can develop a new drug or whatever the product is, shouldn't have people on the board. But those are the people who should be on the board, not hedge fund managers who come and buy the drugs, try to get buy the shares, try to get the prices up, sell the shares, and then they dominate who's on the board of directors until they make things work. Now that requires a whole different conception of the corporation than you have in the United States. It's not one that does not exist other places in the world. Germany has any company over 500 people has worker representatives on boards. There's lots of places in the world where you have public interest people on boards of companies because it's recognized that those companies have to act in the public interest. But that's run by the board, literally. I mean, it's just become, this is something that with the rise of shareholder value, the only people who need to be on board are representatives of shareholders. I disagree with that.
Let me ask you about one last recommendation. You call for regulating drug prices that have benefited from government funding. Do you mean that to include all drugs or only drugs that have specifically gotten direct funding through the government?
Yeah, well, we're doing research with other people that we're doing research on the whole kind of value chain of developing these drugs. And virtually all of them have some kind of government involved in spending. Either typically in the United States, in the National Institutes of Health, through civil society organizations like universities that are funding a lot of the development, the tuition that the students are paying often could be funding development. So it's the way, particularly at the early stages, drugs get developed in the United States. And then we give them patent protection. There's all kinds of subsidies under most of the early blockbuster drugs in biotech in the 80s and 90s were orphan drugs. And since 1983, there's been all kinds of subsidies and protections in addition to patents under the Orphan Drug Act of 1983. if you go down to live in the Boston area, Massachusetts, and even localities in Massachusetts have all kinds of subsidies they give biotech companies to start up and locate there. And we need to get the return. And we need people on the boards to make sure that when that the companies are investing in a way that we're going to get the return, and that when the return is there, that it goes to the people who actually made the investment, which is generally, again, not the shareholder.
How do you see this paper informing policy moving forward, and do you expect it to have any traction anywhere?
Maybe. I think insofar as it has traction, it's in part because it's seen as a bigger problem. And so I've been writing on this stuff for 25, 30 years. The amount of research we're doing on this has been ramped up because I have an organization called the Academic Industry Research Network, a 501c3 organization, where now I have a number of people I've trained who are working with me, and we can, with help from, we get a lot of funding from various foundations. One is the Institute of Economic Thinking, which put this on its website, and the paper that we wrote, and we can generate the research. Now, you do need to get people to pay attention to the research, and almost exactly 3 years ago, I had an article in Harvard Business Review called Profits Without Prosperity, Stock Buybacks Manipulate the Market and Leave Most Americans Worse Off. And it doesn't exactly sound like the title of an article that you would find in Harvard Business Review. But Harvard Business Review published it. It actually got the prize for Best Article of the Year in Harvard Business Review. And it greatly increased the awareness of the problem among the general public, or informed public, you might say, and also among certain politicians. So Joe Biden has cited that article many times. Elizabeth Warren, Hillary Clinton did at one point in her campaign. Tammy Baldwin, senator from Wisconsin, has been very concerned with this issue and has written letters when Obama was in office to the head of the SEC about this, asking why buybacks are being done. So there is a discussion that's going on, and it's on that particular issue. But of course, we know there's also a big discussion that's going on in the United States, not just about drug prices, but about what's happened to the middle class, why there's been downward mobility, why we haven't had an investment in the labor force that can keep them highly productive. And I think this is a big part of it. And I've written lots of things which make the argument about why running the companies in this way and to maximize shareholder value creates these outcomes: concentration of income, top loss of the class job, and how they're integrally related. So as some people are becoming aware of this and aware of the consequences of this, not just that we have a lot of poor people in the country, we have a lot of people on opioids, we have a lot of people who can't lead productive lives, but that it has, as we all know, or at least seems to be the case, drastic political consequences. People are kind of wising up to this stuff, and they're saying, hey, something's going on. That having been said, you do need to give people good research that shows draws the logical links and gives them the facts they need. So that's what we're trying to do. And we're not the only ones doing it, but the more people who can do this, the better. The more it can get funded to do the research of the sky, the better. So I think we're having some impact, but obviously we'd like to have much bigger impact than we're having.
Bill Lazonick, professor of economics at the University of Massachusetts Lowell and lead author of the working paper from the Institute for New Economic Thinking, U.S. Pharma Financialized Business Model. Bill, thanks so much for your time today.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks for listening. The Bio Report is a production of the Levine Media Group. To automatically download this podcast each week, subscribe to our RSS feed or through iTunes or other podcast manager. To join our mailing list, go to levinemediagroup.com. We'd love to hear from you. If you want to drop us a line or are interested in sponsoring this podcast, send email to danny@levinemediagroup.com. Special thanks to Jonah Levine, who composed our theme music, and the Jonah Levine Collective, which performs it.